You are not my family, we only tolerate you because it is convenient." Those words sliced the air sharper than any knife I had ever held in my kitchen. My daughter's voice trembled, though not from sorrow. No, it was from the thrill of victory, from the cruel satisfaction she thought she had secured. Her hand shook as she scrawled her name across the final line, the pen squeaking slightly against the thick paper. I sat across from her, my cane resting against my knee, my fingers folded calmly in my lap. My hands ached that morning, arthritic, swollen, but steady enough. I watched her with the same silence I once used when she was a little girl having one of her tantrums. But this was no tantrum, this was exile. Her eyes did not look like my daughter's eyes anymore. They were pale, icy, fixed on the page rather than me. She might as well have been a stranger in a fine coat, not the child I once carried on my hip, not the little girl whose hair I once braided with lavender ribbons. I took the pen when it was handed to me. The smell of the notary's ink was sharp, metallic. I pressed my name beneath hers, slow and deliberate. I did not argue. I did not beg. I did not even lift my eyes to hers. When I was finished, I slid the pen away, placed my palm over the papers for the briefest second, as if blessing them with the last of my illusions, and then I stood. I took my cane, the familiar weight grounding me, and walked out of that sterile office with its lemon-polished wooden table and faint whiff of dust. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because I knew what she had just done. And she didn't. When she set the pen down, my daughter believed she had finally won. The corners of her mouth twitched in a restrained smile, one of those sly little smirks she wore whenever she thought she had outsmarted me. I recognized it well. It was the same smirk she used as a teenager when she stole from my purse and pretended she hadn't. Some gestures, it seems, never change, even when the face ages. She leaned back in her chair, brushing an invisible speck of dust off her sleeve, as if the room were a courtroom and she had just delivered the final word. I could hear the faint clicking of her manicured nails against the wood, sharp, impatient taps, already eager for the spoils she believed were hers. She thought she had secured everything I had worked for, the house with the red shutters, the savings I had scraped together through decades of endless shifts at the hospital laundry, the tiny securities I had built stitch by stitch, coin by coin. She thought she had finally shut the door on me and locked it from the inside, leaving me with nothing but a cane and a shadow of my pride. But oh, my poor child. She had rushed. Her hunger was greater than her caution. She hadn't read carefully, her eyes too blinded by greed to see the words that sealed her fate. She had been so eager to sign, so quick to prove her power, that she hadn't realized the trick of the ink. It wasn't my name that had been erased from the estate. It was hers. I can still recall the faint scratching sound of the notary's pen when he circled the section for her signature. His voice was calm, but I noticed the way his throat bobbed as he swallowed, his eyes flicking from her to me. He must have wondered if she understood what she was doing. Of course, she didn't. And so, with the impatience of a gambler convinced the dice will land in her favor, she signed her own disinheritance. Her own hand had carved her out of my will, her own strokes had sealed the gate she thought she was opening. She slid the papers back with such arrogance, her perfume lingering in the air, heavy, a sharp mix of sandalwood and something sweeter. I remember how it clung to my blouse long after she had gone, like an unpleasant echo of her presence. She believed she was walking out of that office with the key to everything I had bled for. She didn't know she was walking out empty-handed. The air outside was cool when I stepped into it, the sun pale behind thin clouds. I inhaled deeply, the crispness filling my chest, and for a moment I almost pitied her. Almost. But pity is wasted on someone who has mistaken cruelty for strength. As I walked away, my cane striking a steady rhythm against the pavement, I thought of the roses in my garden waiting to be watered, the kettle that would whistle on my stove, the familiar smell of chamomile tea that would greet me at home. My daughter had no idea that what she tried to steal was never really hers. And soon, very soon, she would discover the truth herself. I raised her alone after her father vanished like morning mist. One day he was there, whistling as he polished his boots, and the next he was gone, leaving behind only an empty wardrobe and the faint smell of tobacco in the curtains. I was 23, holding a crying child in my arms and no clue how to keep us afloat. I gave her everything I could, even when it meant nothing was left for me. There were nights when I went to bed hungry, sipping only hot water with lemon to quiet my stomach while she ate the last piece of bread. I stitched her dresses from second-hand fabric, sewing until my fingers bled, just so she wouldn't look poor at school. The hospital laundry became my battlefield. The air in there was always heavy with bleach, so sharp it burned the back of my throat. Steam from the pressing machines clung to my skin, damp and suffocating, until my hair curled against my temples. I pressed uniforms until my hands cracked open, red and raw, the skin splitting no matter how much ointment I rubbed in. But I endured it. I endured everything, because every coin meant another month of books, shoes, opportunities, for her. She was my pride. Oh, how I boasted about her. To the other women in the laundry room, I spoke of her good grades, her smile, her brilliance. I tucked photos of her into my apron pocket, showing anyone who would look. I believed I was shaping a brighter future, a path where she would never have to scrub or press or count pennies as I did. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The warmth in her hugs cooled. The thank yous dried up, replaced with demands. She stopped seeing my sacrifices as love and began to see them only as obligations. A wallet, a servant, a stepping stone. The first time she called me just to ask for money, without even a hello, I felt something shatter inside me. Still, I told myself it was a phase, that her heart would soften. I clung to that hope like a child clings to a blanket, worn but comforting. I did not know then that the girl I had once fed with my own hunger would one day try to strip me of everything. And yet, perhaps, I should have seen it coming. For years, I kept waiting for my daughter to come back to me, not as a beggar, not as a hunter circling prey, but simply as a daughter. I waited for a softness in her voice, for a genuine, "How are you, Mama?" instead of, "Can you send me money?" I waited for a hug that wasn't calculated, for laughter that wasn't forced. Every time the telephone rang, I held my breath, fingers trembling as I picked up the receiver. I told myself, this time it will be different. This time she'll remember I am her mother. But the words that followed were always the same: a new expense, a new desire, a new complaint. Even her sighs carried the weight of disdain, as if speaking to me was a burden she could barely tolerate. Still, I waited. Hope is a stubborn thing, like a weed that pushes through cracks in the pavement no matter how many times it's crushed. I watered that hope daily, even when it dried me out inside. I kept her photos on the mantelpiece, dusted them with care, even kissed the glass sometimes, though I knew it was foolish. A mother's heart does not give up easily. The day of the signing, as I prepared myself to face her, I still carried a sliver of that hope in my chest. I remember smoothing the hem of my blouse in front of the mirror, fussing with the collar until it sat just right. I told myself she might surprise me. Perhaps the sight of me walking slowly with my cane would stir some memory in her. Me holding her hand as a child, me patching her wounds when she scraped her knees. Perhaps compassion had not died in her completely. When she walked into the office, her heels clicked sharply against the floor, the smell of her perfume announcing her before her voice did. She looked polished, powerful, untouchable. And still I searched her face for some flicker of warmth. Just one. As the notary laid the papers in front of us, I prayed, not to any saint in particular, but to life itself, that something in her would pause. That she would look at me and remember who I was to her. That she would falter, even for a second, and say, "Mama, maybe we don't need to do this." But she didn't. Her hand reached for the pen with the same eagerness she once had when reaching for candy as a child. Her eyes gleamed, not with love, but with hunger. The sound of her signature scratching across the page was louder to me than the tick of the clock on the wall. And yet, even as she signed away her last thread of connection to me, I smiled. Can you imagine? Smiled. Because part of me, the foolish, stubborn part, still whispered, maybe after this she'll realize what she's done. Maybe this is the moment she'll understand how far she's gone, and come back to me. Oh, how naive I was. Hope is the sweetest poison, and I drank it willingly that day. As I rose from the chair, cane in hand, I felt the ache in my hip flare with each step. It was a sharp, biting pain, the kind that makes you wince, but I kept walking. I told myself that pain was proof I was alive, proof I could still endure. And while she thought she had won, I carried something she did not, the knowledge of what was truly written in those papers. That hope, that fragile, treacherous hope, was still fluttering in my chest as I walked away. But it wouldn't last much longer. I remember the way the notary looked at me that day, as though he carried a secret he wasn't sure he should share. His eyebrows knit together when my daughter pressed the pen too quickly into his hand, his lips parting as if to speak, then closing again with the weight of discretion. His fingers trembled slightly when he slid the documents across the polished wood toward her. The room itself smelled of old paper and lemon oil, the kind of scent that clings to places where too many signatures have sealed too many lives. A brass clock ticked on the wall, each second louder than it needed to be, marking time like a drumbeat to some invisible march. My daughter didn't notice any of this, of course. She never noticed small things. She was too busy smoothing her sleeve, adjusting the gold bracelet on her wrist so that it caught the light. Her movements were quick, impatient. She wanted to get this done, to close the deal, to collect the prize she thought was waiting for her. When she reached for the pen, I saw the faintest hesitation in the notary's eyes. They flicked to me for a brief second, questioning, almost pleading. As if he were asking silently, "Do you understand what's about to happen?" Oh, I understood. I gave him the smallest nod, almost imperceptible. My fingers tapped lightly on the cane resting against my knee, a steady rhythm that grounded me. My silence was not weakness, it was agreement. He cleared his throat then, but said nothing. His duty was to the documents, not to the people signing them. Still, his hand lingered on the papers a moment too long before letting go, as though reluctant to let the trap close. My daughter barely scanned the words before scrawling her name. The scratch of her pen was harsh, impatient, like claws on bark. She didn't pause to read the clauses, didn't notice the small adjustments in phrasing, the subtle shift of names. She wanted speed, not clarity. She wanted victory, not truth. When it was my turn, the notary's eyes followed every movement of my hand. I signed slowly, pressing each letter as though carving them into stone. I held the pen with care, feeling the weight of what was being sealed. The ink smelled faintly metallic, and when I set it down, I let my palm rest flat against the paper for a moment, as if acknowledging the finality of it all. The notary gathered the documents, his hands steady again now that the deed was done. He offered a polite smile, but his eyes betrayed him. There was something there, curiosity, maybe even pity. Perhaps he wondered whether I had been tricked. Or perhaps he suspected, just as I did, that the trick had been played on someone else entirely. As we rose from our chairs, my daughter swept her bag over her shoulder with a flourish, her perfume trailing behind her. She didn't look back at the papers. She didn't even glance at me. She believed the matter was finished, victory secured. But the notary lingered. He watched me as I steadied myself with my cane, his gaze searching, almost reverent. When our eyes met, he gave the smallest incline of his head, like a man who knows he has witnessed something more profound than a simple transaction. I walked out of that office with the echo of his look following me. And though no words had passed between us, I knew he had seen the truth. I had not been defeated. And one day soon, my daughter would learn just how grave her mistake had been. A week before the signing, I had sat across from Mr. Harlan, my attorney of 20 years. His office always smelled faintly of leather and ink, with the softer undercurrent of the pipe tobacco he no longer smoked but still kept in a jar on the shelf. The scent clung to the room like memory, bittersweet and comforting. He looked at me over his glasses, the papers between us untouched. "Are you certain, Mrs. Lewis?" His voice carried that weight of formality he used when the subject was grave. "This change will protect you, yes. But it will also be final. There is no going back." I folded my hands in my lap, fingers laced tightly together to still their tremble. My cane rested against the arm of the chair, and I found myself tapping it once, twice, just to ground my thoughts. "If my own blood sees me as a burden," I said slowly, each word measured, "then blood means nothing. I have carried her further than she ever carried me. If she sees me only as an obstacle, then I must stop being her stepping stone." He leaned back, silent for a long moment, studying me as though measuring my resolve. His pen rolled between his fingers, the soft click of its cap echoing in the quiet. Finally, he gave a small nod. "Then we will do as you wish. Your home will remain yours until the day you no longer walk its halls. And when that day comes, it will pass to the one you trust, not the one who betrayed you." I felt my throat tighten. My eyes flicked toward the window, where sunlight filtered through the blinds in neat little stripes, striping the carpet like prison bars. I thought of my grandson then, the only one who still sat with me at the kitchen table, who watered my roses without being asked. "Yes," I whispered. "Protect my home. Protect my dignity." Mr. Harlan slid the papers toward me, his hand steady, and I signed. For the first time in years, my name felt like a shield rather than a target. The night before the signing, I cooked her favorite meal. Roast chicken with rosemary, the skin rubbed with garlic and lemon, crisping golden in the oven until the house was filled with its fragrance. I peeled potatoes, mashed them with butter and cream, just the way she liked when she was little. I even set out the blue china plates that had belonged to my mother, polished until they gleamed beneath the light. It was almost comical, this performance of normalcy. I moved about the kitchen slowly, my joints aching with every bend, but my hands steady, practiced. The familiar rhythm of cooking soothed me, the chopping of carrots, the hiss of oil in the pan, the clink of cutlery as I laid the table. These were rituals that once meant love, and perhaps I let myself pretend they still did, if only for a moment. She arrived late, sweeping in with the sound of her heels against the tiles, the sharp scent of her perfume drowning out the warm aroma of food. She didn't comment on the effort, didn't notice the tablecloth pressed smooth or the candles flickering. She sat down, pulled out her phone, and launched into chatter about the luxury car she wanted, some foreign model with leather seats and a sound system, worthy of her status, as she called it. I served her plate with care, setting it gently before her, steam rising from the chicken. She barely touched it. A single bite, a half-hearted chew, before she pushed it aside. "Too heavy," she muttered, already scrolling through photos of houses online. I smiled anyway, folding my napkin neatly across my lap, pouring her wine with a steady hand. My own portion I ate slowly, savoring the rosemary that clung to my fingertips, the taste grounding me in the present. Every motion was deliberate, controlled. She talked and talked, her voice sharp with ambition, each word dripping with entitlement. I nodded at the right moments, my cane resting against my chair like an old confidant, silent but present. Inside, though, I was elsewhere. My mind was already settled, my resolve hardened. It was almost amusing, the contrast between us. She thought she was orchestrating her grand victory, that tomorrow would mark the end of my independence and the beginning of her reign. Meanwhile, I had already tied the last knots of my plan. The documents were ready, the signatures prepared. Her eagerness to erase me would be the very thing that erased her instead. I watched her lift the wineglass to her lips, her rings flashing under the light. She spoke of designer clothes, of trips she intended to take once the house was sorted. My home, my sanctuary, reduced in her mouth to a bargaining chip. And still I smiled, though inside, my heart tightened. Because in that moment, I realized I was not mourning her betrayal anymore. I was mourning the daughter I once had, the little girl who used to lick the mixing spoon when I baked, who curled up against me with the smell of soap still in her hair after bath time. That child was gone, and no meal, no kindness, no sacrifice could bring her back. So I ate in silence, the candles flickering low, the clock ticking softly in the corner. She never noticed how calm I was, how still. She mistook my quiet for weakness, as she always had. But in truth, it was preparation. The table cleared, the plates washed, the food packed away. Tomorrow, everything would change. And she would never see it coming. The very next morning, she came to me without pretense. There was no soft greeting, no false sweetness layered over her words. She stood in the doorway of my sitting room, arms crossed, her coat still on as though she could not be bothered to stay long. Her perfume clashed with the scent of the roses I had cut fresh that morning, their petals still damp from dew. "You need to start looking at care homes," she said, as casually as if she were suggesting a change in wallpaper. Her voice was flat, efficient, like someone reading out a grocery list. "It's time. This house is too big for you, and you can't keep up with it anymore." I sat in my chair by the window, the one where the morning sun always reached me first. My cane leaned against the armrest, and I smoothed the fabric of my skirt with slow, steady strokes. My tea cooled on the table beside me, steam curling into nothing. "You want me gone," I said quietly, more observation than question. She shrugged, eyes glinting as they roamed the room, already appraising it like merchandise. "It's practical, Mama. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The market is strong right now, we can get a good price. And you'll be better off in a place with care." She said the word as if it were a bitter pill she had to swallow. I looked at her, really looked. The woman standing before me was not the child I raised, not the girl who once clung to my hand at the doctor's office, trembling at the sight of needles. No, this was a stranger dressed in ambition, her eyes hard and calculating. "You want the house," I said. At least she had the decency not to deny it. She smiled, a small, cold twist of her lips. "Yes. And why shouldn't I? I've earned it. I've been patient. You've lived here long enough." The final nail. The last illusion hammered shut. I felt my chest tighten, not with surprise, but with the sharp ache of acceptance. For years, I had told myself she might soften, that under the greed there was still a thread of love binding us together. But here it was, laid bare in the morning light. She wanted me gone, erased, reduced to a name on a care home registry while she paraded through the halls of my home. I reached for my tea, the porcelain warm in my hands though the liquid had cooled. The taste was bitter now, oversteeped, but I swallowed it anyway. My gestures were deliberate, calm, while hers grew restless, tapping her nails on the doorframe, adjusting her bag, already impatient for my compliance. It was in that moment, more than the day of the signing, more than any previous insult, that I understood completely. I was not her mother in her eyes. I was an obstacle, a piece of furniture to be moved, sold, discarded. And yet, she thought she had already won. She didn't know that her demand had only sealed the coffin of my illusions, and nailed shut the lid on her own inheritance. I set the teacup down gently, the sound of porcelain against wood ringing softly through the room. "I see," I said. "Nothing more." And as she turned sharply on her heel, muttering about appointments and deadlines, I leaned back in my chair and let the morning sun warm my face. She had just handed me the final piece of peace I needed, the knowledge that there was no daughter left to save. Only myself. So I gave her what she wanted. That morning, I dressed carefully, navy blouse buttoned to the collar, skirt pressed crisp, shoes polished though they pinched my swollen feet. My cane clicked against the floor with every step, steady as a metronome. I walked into that office with my head high, though inside, my chest carried the heaviness of decades. She was already there, lounging in the chair like a queen awaiting tribute. The notary shuffled the papers with a seriousness that made the air feel thicker, as though even the walls knew what was about to happen. I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and listened to the rustle of the documents as they were placed before us. My daughter didn't hesitate. Her pen scratched across the page in sharp strokes, her mouth curving into that self-satisfied smirk. She didn't even glance at me. When it was my turn, I moved slowly, deliberately. I felt the weight of the pen in my hand, the cool smoothness of it pressing against my fingers. I signed with care, each letter written as though carved into stone. My cane rested against the table, my free hand smoothing the hem of my blouse out of habit. Across from me, she smirked wider, convinced she had triumphed. Her eyes glittered with the thrill of conquest, and I could almost hear her thoughts, "Finally, it's mine. Finally, I've won." Her victory was so sweet to her that she didn't even notice the ground crumbling beneath her feet. She thought she had buried me that day. But in truth, she had buried herself. I stood when it was done, my cane tapping once against the floor. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The silence between us was enough, heavy as stone. And though she walked out smiling, she had no idea she was walking into ruin. It took 3 days for the phone calls to begin. At first, there was only silence, a blessed, golden silence that wrapped itself around my little house like a protective shawl. I spent those days tending my roses, their petals soft beneath my fingertips, their thorns sharp and unapologetic. The kettle whistled on the stove, the smell of chamomile filling the kitchen, and for once, the walls felt like they belonged only to me again. On the third morning, the telephone rang. Its shrill cry cut through the air, startling even the sparrows perched on the garden fence. I let it ring. I was kneeling then, trimming back the lavender, its perfume clinging to my hands, grounding me in the present. The ringing stopped, but the silence that followed was different, charged, uneasy. The second call came that afternoon. This time, I lifted the receiver, but I didn't speak. Her voice, once so sharp and commanding, trembled like a cracked bell. "Mother, please, we need to talk. There's been some kind of mistake." I could almost see her then, pacing in her glossy shoes, the papers spread before her like shards of broken glass. For the first time, perhaps, she was reading them properly. For the first time, she was seeing what she had signed. I didn't answer. I let the silence between us stretch until she broke it with a shaky, "Please call me back," before hanging up. By the evening, there were messages waiting. Her tone shifted with each one. At first urgent, then pleading, then angry. "Mother, you don't understand, they say the property isn't mine. There's been a mistake in the documents, something's wrong. We have to fix this." But there was no mistake. Not in the ink, not in the signatures. The mistake had been hers, her arrogance, her haste, her blind hunger. That night, I sat by the fire, the flames crackling low, shadows dancing across the walls. My cane rested by my side, my knitting in my lap, though I barely stitched a row. The telephone sat silent again, waiting. I thought of all the nights I had waited for her call, heart leaping at the sound of the ring, only to hear her ask for money. And now, when she finally called with true need in her voice, I gave her nothing. Not cruelty, not revenge, simply nothing. I let her stew in the silence, stew in the mess of her own making. The bitterness she had poured into my cup for years was now hers to drink, and she drank it eagerly without realizing. When the phone rang again the next morning, I didn't even rise. I let the sound echo through the house while I stirred sugar into my tea, the spoon clinking gently against the porcelain. The sweetness on my tongue was mine alone. Her desperation was only beginning. And I, for the first time in decades, felt no urgency to answer. For the first time in decades, I felt peace. It was not triumph, not revenge, those things are noisy, bitter, fleeting. No, what filled me was quieter, steadier, like a warm quilt pulled over tired bones. A peace that seeped into my skin and settled deep inside, where the ache of years had lived. I realized then that protecting myself was not cruelty. It was survival. For too long, I had confused sacrifice with love, endurance with devotion. I had poured myself out like a pot of tea, letting her drink until the bottom was dry, believing that was what mothers were meant to do. But now, as I stirred honey into my cup, I understood. There is no shame in refusing to be emptied anymore. She had chosen greed over love. Again and again, she had chosen it. And finally, I had chosen myself. The garden outside glowed in the late afternoon, the roses heavy with blooms, their fragrance drifting through the open window. I traced the rim of my teacup with my finger, feeling the smooth porcelain, the steadiness of it. I had been like this cup, sturdy, useful, filled again and again until cracks began to show. But unlike porcelain, I had mended. And this time, I would not let myself shatter. Her messages kept arriving. Some angry, some pleading, some dripping with a sweetness so false it almost made me laugh. "Mama, please, you know I didn't mean it." The same mouth that spat venom now tried to offer sugar. But I had tasted enough of her bitterness to know better. I walked through the house slowly, cane tapping against the floorboards, touching the walls with my free hand as I went. Each surface was familiar, the cool banister polished smooth by years of my grip, the quilt folded neatly on the arm of the sofa, stitched by my mother long before. These were mine, truly mine. The house breathed with me, and I with it. She had tried to claim it, but it had never belonged to her. That night, I slept without fear for the first time in years. No dread of the next demand, no anxiety over the next scheme. I drifted off with the scent of lavender on my pillow and the soft weight of my blanket over me. I dreamed not of her, but of sunlight, of laughter, of simpler days when love was still pure. And in the morning, when the telephone rang again, I did not jump. I let it ring as I buttered my toast, the crunch of it between my teeth far sweeter than any false reconciliation she could offer. I had stepped out of her shadow. And though she did not know it yet, my silence was stronger than any answer I could have given her. What my daughter did not know, what she could never imagine, was that my silence was not empty. It was full of preparations, of choices already made long before she signed away her inheritance. I had not walked into that notary's office blind. I had walked in armored. Weeks earlier, Mr. Harlan and I had drawn up the documents with meticulous care. Every word, every clause, woven together like fine embroidery. The house, the savings, the little securities I had scraped together, they were not floating in limbo, waiting to be claimed. They were rooted, firmly, in my name until the day I drew my last breath. And when that day came, they would not go to the daughter who saw me as a burden. They would go to the one soul who had stood quietly by my side all these years, my grandson. Ah, my sweet boy. Not so little anymore, taller than me, his hands broad, but his heart still gentle. While his mother treated me like an inconvenience, he treated me like home. He watered my roses without being asked, the earthy scent clinging to his clothes when he came inside. He sat at my kitchen table, eating toast and jam, listening to my stories even when I rambled. He laughed in this house, a sound that filled the walls with a warmth I thought I had lost. He never said much when his mother barked orders or made cruel remarks. His eyes would lower, his lips pressed tight, as though he had learned long ago that silence was his only shield. But I saw the pain in him, the quiet loyalty, the way he carried love without demanding anything in return. And so, one evening, as we shared tea and shortbread in the kitchen, I touched his hand and told him softly, "One day, all of this will be yours. Not as money, not as bricks and wood, but as a home. A true home." His eyes widened, not with greed, but with something far rarer, gratitude. That night, after he left, I sat at my desk and opened the folder Mr. Harlan had given me. The papers rustled softly, the smell of fresh ink rising as I ran my fingers over the signatures. My cane leaned against the desk, steady and patient, while I felt the weight of generations in my hands. This was not revenge. I had no interest in punishing my daughter. Life itself had already taken care of that, though she didn't yet realize it. No, this was something quieter, steadier. This was protection. A final act of love for the one who still carried my blood with kindness, not with cruelty. And as I folded the papers back into their envelope, sealing them shut, I felt lighter. For the first time, the future no longer frightened me. The house would not be lost, my name would not be erased, and my dignity would remain intact. My daughter thought she had won. But she had already disinherited herself. And she had given me the chance to protect the only family who still knew how to love. It wasn't long before she stormed back into the notary's office, her voice sharp enough to pierce through the walls. I wasn't there, but Mr. Harlan later described it to me with a shake of his head, the faintest trace of pity in his eyes. She had burst through the door, waving the documents like a flag of war. "There's been a mistake," she shouted. "Fraud. Someone has tricked me." Her heels clattered across the tiled floor, her perfume arriving before her fury. But there was no fraud, no trick. Only her own hand, her own signature, bold and undeniable at the bottom of every page. The officials laid the papers bare before her. Line by line, clause by clause, they showed her what she had signed. Her name, scrawled in her own impatient strokes, sealing her exclusion. Her consent, unforced, written in ink that had long since dried. I was told the room grew still, the kind of silence that carries weight. The clerks shifted uncomfortably, their pens poised but unmoving. The notary's eyes softened, not toward her, but toward the invisible presence of me, the mother she had thought to erase. And for once, she could not twist the story to make me the villain. For once, there was no scapegoat, no excuse. Only the mirror of her own arrogance staring back at her from every line of those documents. They said her voice faltered then, dropping from outrage to pleading. She asked for exceptions, for loopholes, for mercy. But the law is not a mother. It does not bend because you cry. When Mr. Harlan told me all this later, I simply sat in my chair, smoothing the hem of my skirt as I listened. My cane rested across my knees, and in my lap lay the envelope with my copy of those same papers. She had walked into that office to scream about fraud. Instead, she had only managed to expose herself. She barged into my home that evening like a storm breaking through fragile glass. The door slammed against the wall, rattling the picture frames, and her voice arrived before her footsteps, shrill, breaking, filled with fury and panic. "You tricked me," she screamed, her cheeks flushed crimson, her eyes wild. "You wicked old woman. Give it back." I was sitting in my armchair by the window, knitting in my lap, the fire crackling low in the hearth. The smell of rosemary still lingered from the roast I had made earlier for myself, simple and tender, seasoned with care. My cane rested against the arm of the chair, within easy reach, though I did not need it just then. I looked up slowly, calmly, and for a long moment, I let her rage fill the room without answering. Her footsteps pounded against the wooden floor as she lunged toward the papers I held loosely in my hands. Mr. Harlan had given me duplicates for my safekeeping. The rustle of the pages seemed to drive her mad. She clawed at them, but I stood, taller than I had in years, the strength of my decision straightening my spine. My cane tapped once against the floor, a punctuation mark in the chaos. "No," I said, my voice steady, clear, and louder than I expected. It startled her enough that she froze for half a second. "You gave it away." Her eyes widened, then narrowed again, her face contorting between disbelief and rage. "You don't understand. I didn't mean to sign that. They tricked me. You tricked me. You planned this." I smoothed the papers with one hand, the crinkle of the pages sharp in the tense silence. "You signed," I replied. "No one forced your hand. You were so eager to take, you didn't even read what you were taking. That is not my fault." The fire popped behind me, sending a faint scent of smoke into the air. She stood trembling, her fists clenched, her breath shallow. For a moment, I saw the little girl she once was, the child who stomped her feet when denied a toy, who screamed when she didn't get her way. But this was no child. This was a woman, undone by her own greed, standing in the ruins she built for herself. "You ruined me," she hissed. I shook my head slowly. "No, child. You ruined yourself." The silence that followed was heavier than all her shouting. My cane tapped against the floor as I walked past her, each step deliberate. She stood motionless, stunned by the firmness in me she had never expected to find. For once, she was not the one in control. And for once, I was no longer afraid to tell her so. She collapsed then, as though the weight of her fury and her fear had finally crushed her knees. One moment she was standing tall, fists clenched, lips curled with venom. The next, she was crumpled at my feet, clutching at the hem of my skirt like a desperate child. "Mama, please," she sobbed, her voice breaking, her mascara streaking black rivers down her cheeks. Her hands clung to the fabric, pulling at it until the threads strained. "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean any of it. Please, I need you." Her tears dripped onto my shoes, salty and hot, staining the polished leather I had worn for decades. She buried her face against me, wailing, shaking so violently I could feel the tremors through my cane as it pressed against the floor. The same mouth that had spat venom, the same eyes that had looked at me with nothing but disdain, now dripped with false sweetness. She cried like a child who had broken her toy and wanted her mother to fix it. But this was no toy, it was her own life she had broken, her own greed that had shattered everything. I stood still, letting her clutch and sob. My fingers smoothed the fabric of my blouse, a steady rhythm, while I looked down at her with eyes that saw not just the weeping woman, but the years that had led to this. The nights I starved so she could eat. The mornings I pressed uniforms until my hands cracked. The decades I gave her everything I had, only to be told I was nothing. "You needed me when I was feeding you," I said quietly, my voice steady though my chest trembled with the weight of memory. "You needed me when I was working nights, my body breaking, so you could study. You needed me when life demanded more than you could give." Her sobs grew louder, desperate, almost theatrical. "Mama, please, I'm sorry. I'll change. I'll be better." I pulled my skirt gently from her grasp, stepping back just enough so her hands fell empty against the floor. She gasped as though I had struck her, her face twisted in shock. "You chose convenience over love," I said, lifting my cane and tapping it once against the wood. The sound rang out, sharp and final. "And now you have convenience. Nothing more." The words hung in the air like a sentence passed, not shouted but declared with the weight of truth. She stared up at me, broken, her face blotched red, her mouth open as though searching for some new weapon, some last thread of power. But there was none left. Only the silence of a mother who had finally chosen herself. I turned from her then, the fire crackling softly behind me, the scent of smoke and rosemary lingering in the air. My cane tapped a steady rhythm as I walked away, each step lighter than the one before. Behind me, her sobs echoed through the house, but I did not stop. I had carried her for too long. That burden, at last, was no longer mine. She left that night in a storm of fury and despair, her screams echoing down the street long after the front door slammed shut. "I'll ruin you," she shrieked, her voice hoarse, raw with rage. "You'll regret this." The neighbors must have heard every word, curtains twitched, shadows shifted behind windows, but I did not chase her, nor did I explain. Let them think what they wished. Truth has a way of revealing itself in time. When silence returned, it was almost holy. I sat by the fire with my cane across my lap, listening to the soft crackle of the logs, breathing in the faint scent of pine. The papers rested on the table beside me, sealed, untouchable. My name was safe. My home was mine, my dignity intact. There was nothing left for her to ruin. She had already undone herself with her own impatience, her own arrogance. Her greed had not devoured me, it had devoured her. The next morning, I woke to birdsong drifting through the open window. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth from the garden. I brewed my tea slowly, spooning honey into the cup, and felt something unfamiliar: freedom. No dread of her next demand, no weight pressing down on my chest. Only freedom. I had not only protected my home, I had protected my peace. And peace, I discovered, is worth far more than any inheritance. I sit now in my garden, tea warm in my hands, the roses in full bloom around me. Their fragrance drifts on the breeze, sweet and steady, reminding me that life continues to grow even after storms. My cane rests by my chair, the wood smooth beneath my palm, a companion rather than a crutch. My grandson visits often, laughter spilling from him like sunlight, filling these walls with a joy his mother never managed to bring. We talk, we share simple meals, and in his company, I feel not old, but alive. Sometimes I think of her words, "You are not my family." Perhaps she was right. Family is not who shares your blood. Family is who shares your love, who tends to it as one tends to a fragile plant, watering it with care. And in the quiet of my garden, I know I have chosen well. Peace, at last, belongs to me.